It's lovely to see you all. Over these the 3 Sundays where I'm here, so 3 out of the 4 Sundays during this month, we're going to deal with these 3 topics. Today we're going to look at work and service. Next week we're going to look at money and possessions. So that's the challenge, to see how many of you come back. And then in 4 weeks' time, we're going to look at rest and retirement. And we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about all of those topics. And I've put that under the heading of the God of real life. And the reason why I say it's the God of real life is because I think so often these are topics that we're afraid to talk about in churches. I think they're often very difficult for ministers, pastors, church leaders to talk about because, again, as you heard from what I just said earlier, my experience is living with a pastor as a father, that these are difficult subjects for ministers to broach, because often what people will say who are sitting in the pew is, well, what do you know? What do you know? You have a different sort of job, which is unfair, but it's a difficult one for them to approach. So I thought, I don't fill any of those roles, so let's tackle them and deal with it head on. So they're not often talked about, but let's try and deal with what the Bible has to say with it anyway today. So let's look at this topic of work and service. Now, I want to just be really clear about this, that we're not just talking about paid employment here. We're talking about whatever you do. Whatever you do once you step outside of this building. So what you're going to be doing tomorrow, it might be caring for a child, it might be caring for an older person, it might be volunteering for a food bank, it might be in some form of paid employment. Whatever it is that you are doing, this is what we're going to look at. But I always think it's important at the start of a message to think of what have really helpful theologians and philosophers said about this topic. So I looked high and low and found these really helpful words. Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. And I just found these words really, really helpful, because this is really what so many people think about their workplace, isn't it? You know, why am I there? Well, it's just to make a living, and they use your mind. They never give you credit. It's just a really unfair equation, isn't it? Stacked in other people's favour. And Saint Dolly of Parton, who came up with those words, was extremely helpful, I think, to help us to consider the things that God considers important. Might be slightly different to that, so let's have a look. So let's consider this topic of work and service. So what does God actually consider to be important? And it might be that your misunderstanding of the Christian Bible and of Christian principles is that the only things that God considers important are the following: that it's all about church attendance, that it's all about your prayer life, that it's all about reading the Bible, home group attendance, how many people you witness to. And that might just be your understanding of really the only things that God considers to be important. Now, if that's true, then there's a list of priorities for Christians, isn't there? If that's true, there are certain people in the church who matter more than others, because some people have more time to be able to do those things than others. So let's just have a look at what we might be thinking are the most important people in church life. Who matters most to God? Well, clearly, pastors must matter most, mustn't they? Is that the perception that you have? Because after that, then it would probably be overseas missionaries. And then, of course, UK-based missionaries, because they haven't taken quite as much faith to go overseas as the UK-based missionaries. And then after that, well, elders and deacons, they're much higher up on the ladder, clearly. They're holy people. And then we go to poor Christians. They must be next. Then we go to middle-income Christians and then rich Christians. Because surely if the only things that matter are the list that we had on the last slide, then that's the order it should be. And I know what you're thinking, right at the bottom, financial advisors. I know that's what you're thinking. And clearly, as I said earlier, I've got skin in the game. I've got a dad and a brother who fit into those higher categories. But that's perhaps the way that we might be tempted to think that certain people matter more in the Christian life than others. So let's just have a think about this. This is a quote from somebody. I want you to really think this through. I teach Sunday school 45 minutes a week, and they haul me up to the front of the church to pray for me. I teach at school 45 hours a week, and no one has ever prayed for me. What do we think everybody does when we leave this building? What do we think people are up to? Does our Christian life just suddenly dissipate? Does it just vanish once we're out of the door? Unless, of course, we're in a home group, because that's different. Or is what we do and who we meet and who we talk to and who we speak with during the week really, really important? Again, lovely quote that's coming up by an author and an advertising expert, Dorothy L. Sayers, who wrote this: "The only Christian work is good work well done." Whether it is church embroidery, and I don't know why she picked the next one, or sewage farming. But it's Christian work is not solely limited to those things we had on our list. Christian work is how we work in the world, and we are called to do it well. So we very kindly had this passage read to us from Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 to 20. And the reason why I wanted that included in our, before we looked at this, is because when does this occur in the Bible? Well, you might say, well, it's Genesis chapter 2, and you would be right. It is. But what's so important about Genesis chapter 2? Genesis chapter 2 gives us a complete picture of what life would be like if sin wasn't in the world. It's the only chapter we have in the Bible where we see everything pure before sin comes into the world. God creates in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is how life should be. And what does God call mankind to do? He calls mankind to work. I don't know if you can see that in red. He calls mankind to work the earth, to work the garden and take care of it. You notice that work is part of God's plan. Even before sin comes into the world, work is part of God's plan. And look at the job that he gives mankind. He gives Adam and Eve this task. He brought all the birds, all the animals that God had formed, all the birds, and he brings them to mankind, to Adam and Eve, to see what he would name them. And whatever the man named each living creature, that was its name. Okay, so Adam had this incredible task of naming every species of creature on the planet. Now, I just sort of searched, well, roughly how many species are there? There is some debate that it is between 2.1 million and 7.8 million species. And that's even before we allow for what was lost in the flood, which was probably several more besides. So let's say a minimum of 2.1 million species that Adam had to name. Now, he must have therefore had the duck before, he named that before the duck-billed platypus came along. Do you understand that there is a task that was given to Adam for him to fulfill? There was work that he was required to carry out. But maybe your view of work is this, that it's what we see after the fall, after sin has come into the world. Because we read there that cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, maybe you consider work to be painful toil. You will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food. And maybe that's your vision, that's your opinion, that's your consideration of work, that it's painful toil, it's sweat of your brow, it's hard keeping down the weeds in life. that we were called to do from the garden. Only once have I had an allotment. I had an allotment in our village for 3 years. I didn't really understand how much work it would involve. And I like to do lots of other things during the summer. I love to go and watch cricket. I keep bees. I love going down to the beach. And I didn't realise that then holding down a full-time job and doing those things and weeding an allotment would be virtually impossible. And after 3 years, I was unceremoniously thrown off the allotment site. Which actually in our village is pretty bad. So that was, Mel had to make the walk of shame actually, I was busy. And she was told in no uncertain terms that we had to leave. So despite our best efforts, I managed to grow some raspberry plants, but I'm told that they are the easiest thing on the planet to grow. But the weeds were incredible. But it's hard work keeping a garden. And when we read this passage, we understand that work is hard. So much of it is hard. But maybe we perceive it as painful toil and we see and feel the sweat of our brow. So maybe we've been tricked. Maybe we've been tricked into thinking by the evil one that work is part of the curse, because it isn't. It comes before sin and the fall. And I think sometimes Satan challenges us and pushes us to think that what we are doing has no relevance to God at all. All you're doing is putting food on the table. All you're doing is generating enough, and then you can give 1/10 of it away and the church will be happy with that. But what you do doesn't really matter. Do we think that work is simply secular? It's not spiritual, we might be thinking to ourselves. So therefore, if it's not spiritual, God won't be interested. Or do we think of work simply as paid employment? It just puts food on the table. It just puts clothes on my children. And those things are important. But we've got to think of work as more than that. We've got to think of this as service. So maybe that's what we should be thinking of, service rather than work. And maybe we need to be thinking about the jobs that we do and the work that we have. Who is it benefiting? Who are we helping? I want you just to excuse for a moment the slightly dated language, because this was written in the 1940s. So think where it says man, think woman, think mankind. Let every man abide in his calling, wherein he is called. So in other words, wherever you're called to do, that's your life. And his work will be as sacred as the work of the ministry. Okay, remember our list of the order that we perhaps perceive in the church? Where you work is your ministry. It is not what a man or woman does that determines whether their work is sacred or secular. It is why we do it. Such a helpful quote. I only came across this week. I was pointed to it by an article that I was reading. I'll read it again. Let every man abide in his calling wherein he is called, and his work will be as sacred as the work of the ministry. It is not what a man or woman does that determines whether their work is sacred or secular. It is why they do it. There's an organisation in the States called 94X. Has anyone come across 94X before? No. 94X is based on this statistic, that the average American works 160 hours a month. And that average person in America attends church 1.7 hours per month. That's quite precise, but there we are. That's what the statistics are. In other words, people are at work for 94 times the amount of time that they're at church. So that's our challenge here, that we're outside of this building 94 times more in a month than we are here. So what difference does what happens in here make to what goes on out there? Well, that's quite a long introduction. So we're going to crack on with 6 very quick points. And I'm just going to pinch something from Fruitfulness on the Front Line. I hope you've all read this. This is critical reading. You can get it in a study book, study guide if you want to. Mark Green is the best speaker on this topic ever. So I'm simply pinching the 6 headings which they have, which we'll work our way through very, very quickly in our remaining time this morning. So these 6 headings are modelling godly character, making good work, ministering grace and love, moulding culture, mouthpiece for truth and justice, and a messenger of the gospel. And I want to add one other M in there, is do our Mondays reflect our Sundays? So where is your front line? Is it your workplace? Is it your tennis club, your book club, your chess club, your model makers club? Is it your neighbourhood? Is it where you volunteer? Or is it your home where you have to care for people? So let's look at some of those headings. So the first one, modelling godly character. So you can turn, if you wish, to Ephesians chapter 6. That has these very well-known verses all about work and employment and leading people. So slaves or workers, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. This is godly character. Obey them not only to win their favour when their eye is on you, so don't just behave when your boss is watching, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people. Think of life as God is our employer, not the one who puts the money into your bank at the end of the month. Because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, so there is a message here: if you employ others, if you lead others, if you manage others, treat your slaves, your workers, in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. We need to model godly character in how we live and how we work. Secondly, we need to make good work. Most of you will be familiar with this passage or this verse, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And that's a very familiar verse. And you may have thought about that in terms of good works, as in being nice to people, sharing your crisps or giving money to those who are in need. But actually, the literal Greek translation focuses it in this way: for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus, to do work that is good. That's how it translates literally. So it's not necessarily talking about being kind and doing good works to others. It's doing work that is good. Okay? If you're great at creating something, that's God-given. And you're called to use that as to do it well. If your job is to design machinery, then do it with God in mind. It's good work, because ultimately someone is benefiting. Their life is easier as a result. And if you're not sure about that, let me turn you to Exodus chapter 31, in the information to construct the tabernacle. And that goes on for chapter after chapter, all about the detail in the tabernacle. But these verses are incredible. Look at this. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills." And you might say, what comes next? Because he's a great preacher. No, nothing to do with that at all. Is it because he can pray brilliantly? No. Is it because he writes incredible worship songs? No. What's he been filled with the Spirit of God for? To make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze. To cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts. And then he's got this sidekick as well, Aholiab, son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, to help him. You might have been given incredible talent to create things. You might be artistic, you might be musical, you may have gifts to do incredible things at work. God has called you to that. God has called you to use that and to do it really, really well. Now, in this example, not only was he good, he was exceptional, and he was able to use that to build the tabernacle, to set stones. I was going to highlight the odd little bit of this and ended up thinking I need to just highlight the whole thing. But it's just a remarkable passage that tells us how important it is to work well. Some of you might have heard the story of a medieval traveller who was walking along the road and came across a quarry and found 3 different stonecutters on his journey. He comes to the first and says, "Tell me, good man," because that's how they spoke back then. "Tell me, good man, what are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I'm cutting stones." "And why do you do that?" "Well, pays the bills, puts food on the table." Can't stand it, frankly. And he said, "Okay, fair enough." Moves on to the next man and asks him the same question. "So, my good man, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm cutting stones. I think it's a great career, huge opportunities. After a few years of cutting the stone, eventually I'll be trained as a stonemason, and it really excites me." He said, "That's fantastic." He walks on to the third one and says, "And what are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm cutting stones because this is going towards a huge cathedral where people will gather and worship God." And I wonder where you see your work in that picture. What's the end result? What's the purpose? And is doing it well and doing a good job really important to you? Okay, we move on rapidly to the third one, which is ministering grace and love. Now, I've put a picture up there and a name of Anna-Jane Northsmith. So I've never met her, but I read a blog by her a year or so ago, and I've kept it ever since. And it's just so challenging to me about our responsibilities as individuals and how they change in life. Let me read this to you. I'm going to pretty much read it word for word because she just captures this superbly. He says this: "For the past year, I've been investing a lot of time and energy into a new project. I've spent over 700 hours, at least 30 full days of the last year working on this project. If I was earning the living wage for the time I'd spent on this project, I would have earned over £10,000. What is the project? Nursing my baby," she says. "My little boy was born in early 2024, and I've been able to exclusively feed him pretty much since the day he was born. Day and night, for minutes to hours at a time, I've sat cradling my child and fed him. And I'll be honest," she says, "I've found it really, really hard. Less so physically, after the first few weeks, at least, but more so intellectually," she says, "emotionally, and most unexpectedly from a discipleship perspective." And this is her words: "You see, I went from a job of speaking to churches, writing for big Christian mailing lists, teaching and preaching and sharing the gospel, to sitting on my sofa, watching Grey's Anatomy and feeding my baby. The mundanity of it surprised me," she says. "The unseenness of it frustrated me. The lack of praise, the lack of monetary reward, of recognition, it has humbled me. Was I being a good Christian if I wasn't seen doing it? Was I really fulfilling my God-given potential if I wasn't speaking, writing, and outputting content into the world? What did it look like to be a faithful disciple of Jesus whilst focused entirely on caring for this tiny, needy little child?" She then goes on to say this, and I want this to stay with you. "When I was growing up, my mum had a drawing on her desk of a young woman hanging out the washing. Below it was Luke 1:38, 'Behold, the servant of the Lord.'" So, I've thought a lot about that postcard, she says, in the first year of motherhood. Hanging out the washing, behold, the servant of the Lord. Doing the school run, behold, the servant of the Lord. Wiping snotty noses and pooey bums, behold, the servant of the Lord. Rocking the baby back to sleep at 3 a.m, behold, the servant of the Lord. Breastfeeding, behold, the servant of the Lord. In the mundanity, the ordinariness, and the everyday unseen faithfulness of caring and showing up and sticking around, behold, the servant of the Lord. Whatever task you have to do tomorrow, whether it's a glamorous one or a less glamorous one, an unseen one perhaps, how are we serving God? Are we doing that, fulfilling that task, carrying out that role as something which serves God? And just to conclude this one, Matthew 25, 37 to 40 says this: Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? I'll join in. When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you ill or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So what can we do for God? Jesus says there, feeding someone, giving someone something to drink, clothing them. We are doing that for God. We are doing that for him. So even the simplest task, whether it's seen or unseen, is something that we can do for God. It's something we can do to serve others. Rattling on, moulding culture. What can we do to shape the culture of the organisation that we're in? How can our Christian influence be positive? Well, I'm going to talk, first of all, give an example of an influence that had permeated down to the ground floor. In 1962, shortly after NASA had been launched, John F. Kennedy walked along a corridor in NASA's main office in Texas. And he stopped and spoke to a guy who was sweeping the floor, and he had the opportunity to just have a few minutes with him. And they got chatting, and he just found out a little bit more and said, so what drove you here? Why did you want to have this job? And the janitor replied, Why, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. However insignificant our role might be, look at the bigger picture. What are we doing? How is the culture of serving the Lord Jesus Christ impacting the culture of the environment in which we work? I cannot stand Arsenal. I absolutely can't. I can't believe they finally won the Premier League. Just can't believe it. But to be fair, there are 6 Christian first team players at Arsenal who meet together in a rather untrendy way. I'm going to use the term, the Bible Bros, that they're referred to. And they pray and they meet together and they study before every match. And they are seeking to influence the culture in that team. If only they could stop the diving, I'd be really pleased, but that's Arsenal. But what influence can we have in the place where we work, the place where we volunteer, the place where we give our time, our homes, our neighbourhoods, of influencing the culture, of making a difference? Number 5, we ought to be a mouthpiece for truth and justice. Some of you might recognise that particular character, Del Boy. But how often have we heard this within workplaces? Words to the effect of, oh, it's in the post. It's just gone in the post today. Funny you should be chasing it up. It's just gone in the post today. Or you may have had someone offer to do some work for you for cash. I'm sure none of you will have offered to do anything for cash. Or I've been in a taxi before where I've been offered a blank receipt, which is very helpful. You could put whatever figure you want in there to claim back on your expenses. But we need to be a mouthpiece for truth, for doing things right, to be above reproach. In our office, we use the word virtuous, doing the right thing all the time, whether someone's looking or not. Is it the right thing? So we need to be a mouthpiece for truth and justice wherever we work, wherever we volunteer, whatever location we might find ourselves in. You could perhaps sum this up using the words of Micah chapter 6 and verse 5, which says, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's what we're called to do, to be a mouthpiece for truth and justice. And then the final thing that we're called to do is to be a messenger of the gospel. And I don't know if you ever have those moments where you just think about, I wonder what heaven will be like, or I wonder who I can meet when I'm in heaven. And you might think, well, Elijah would be quite interesting, Moses. You just work your way through different characters in the Bible, George Whitefield, Charles Wesley. Think of different people that you'd like to meet when you're in heaven. This would be one of the first people I'd love to meet. Not necessarily Naaman, although I'm sure it'd be interesting. But let me just read this passage and see if you know what I'm referring to. Now, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. We don't know this girl's name. We don't know how old she was. We don't know anything about her. And yet, as a result of her words, she not only influenced her owner, a slave owner, Naaman, she not only influenced his behavior, but she influenced the entire nation through saying something at the right time. I think she'll be an amazing person to talk to, don't you? Just how did you know that one pointer could make such a difference? What about you? Do you think about where you are, about just a kind word, just an encouragement, just a thoughtful gift or gesture in the workplace can make such a difference to the way that people respond? Not so long ago, I had to have a blood test, and it's really difficult to get in to see anyone at Ipswich just have a blood test. So I ended up going to Colchester, and the only time I could get was 8:15 on a Monday morning. It's not ideal, but anyway, went there 8:15 Monday morning, and the lady who took the blood was fantastic. I genuinely didn't feel the needle go in. I didn't feel anything come out, which I don't think you should anyway. So that was just as well. But it was just seamless. She was just fantastic. And I just turned to her. I think I'd probably read something like this over the weekend. And I just turned to her and said, you're really good at what you do. That was absolutely amazing. She just welled up in front of me. She said, nobody has ever said that to me. Just tomorrow, just be a messenger of the gospel. Whoever you're with, whoever you're speaking to, whoever you're spending your time with, say something positive and point them to Jesus if the opportunity arises. But give them an opportunity to benefit from what you know. Because this slave girl probably should have said, serves you right that you've got leprosy. You took me from my homeland. You've got me here in slavery. But she doesn't. She says something positive and helpful. Whatever you're doing, whether it's serving on a checkout, helping a stressed working mum just get some food together to put food on the table for the kids, whether you're working in a field, whether you're in an office space where the language is awful, let's just look at how we can serve God in our front line, in our workplace. I'm going to end with an amazing quote that will be part of the thread of our three messages together. And it's this: In the total expanse of human life, there is not a square inch of which the Christ, who alone is sovereign, does not declare, "That is mine." Don't think that there's one part of your life which just belongs to you and doesn't belong to God. Because if you want to follow him and serve him and be obedient to him, you have to give everything to him. Today, we've thought about our work. And as we conclude this part of the meeting, I just pray that each of us will consider, for God's glory, whatever we do, that we're unable to earn our way to God's favour. However, as a response to God's goodness, we should do good work and serve others, whatever it is that occupies our time.